Fox News Alert, it is 2 p.m. here in the East, and we are awaiting comments now directly from the president on the dramatic turn of events in Egypt this morning. We just learned how he first heard the news. We've got that for you here in a brand new hour of America Live on a busy Friday afternoon. I'm Megyn Kelly. Welcome. President Obama is expected to speak from the White House shortly. When the president does, we will bring you those comments live. We are told that President Obama was in the middle of an Oval Office meeting when he learned that President Hosni Mubarak was out and the military was in. We are told he then went to watch the events unfolding on the television, as most Americans are doing right now, to see for himself the reaction of the Egyptian protesters who have been in the streets now for 18 days. The celebration rages on in the streets of Cairo right now and across Egypt after a historic shift in power. We've seen no waning of the enthusiasm since the news broke shortly after 11 a.m. Eastern Time this morning. But now the big question is what comes next for Egypt, for the Middle East, and for the United States. Here is what has happened in just the last hour. Egypt's military saying that it is preparing a transition of power and its governing status is only temporary. We have also learned that the Swiss government has frozen any assets belonging to President Mubarak and his family in Switzerland. That not independently confirmed by Fox, but being reported on the wires. Meantime, the shock of this regime change becoming a reality, and it's just starting to sink in for folks. A carnival-like atmosphere in Tahrir Square. They are jubilant. They are overjoyed. They are setting off fireworks where a week ago we saw bottle rockets and Molotov cocktails. And now look at the scene. They made clear yesterday that the solution offered by President Mubarak of transferring power to his vice president but staying technically the president would not do. And less than 24 hours later, they got their way. The Egyptian army said to have stepped in, perhaps strong-armed or otherwise, Mubarak out. But nonetheless, these folks got their way in the end, as they predicted they would. Mike Barrett is a former intel officer in the Office of the Secretary of Defense and a former senior analyst for the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And he is an expert on this region. Mike, thank you so much for being here. You say this is a great day for democracy, but a disastrous one for U.S. policy objectives in the region. Explain.
Well, sure. I think the big challenge here is that while all Americans are pro-democracy and care for the rights and respect the rights of the people, the reality is that this is a very dangerous region. The Central Intelligence Agency often refers to it as the arc of instability. You take the four major powers are Iran, Iraq, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia. That's for a whole host of political and economic reasons. But Iran, is really in a position to be resurgent here because Iraq is focused internally. Egypt is now going to be focused internally. And certainly Saudi Arabia is going to have to be concerned about their own internal security and the survival of their regime, which really opens up the door for Iran to be even further expansionary. And of course, with their nuclear ambitions, which we're often talking about, is a very dangerous time for U.S. policy interest.
Is there any chance, because Judith Miller is live in Tel Aviv, and she suggested at the top of our 1 p.m. hour, that perhaps Iran isn't that jubilant, really? Perhaps there's a chance there that they're getting a little concerned, seeing the growth of these grassroots movements in the Middle East, that maybe they will be next. There was a failed attempted revolution there last year. It didn't go anywhere, but perhaps there's a possibility for some good news in Iran. No?
It's certainly a possibility, but I think it's unrealistic. I mean, the reality is that we've seen this happen in Iran a number of times over the last decade. And every time it happens, the regime there has a much stronger hold on their people than what we see in other parts like Egypt. Egypt has a broadly secular society. They're well educated. You've got the Muslim Brotherhood, but you've got a lot of other moderate voices there. Iran's just not the same situation. They had a large revolution in '79, but since then, these guys have learned the power of revolution, and they know how to stop it.
What about elsewhere in the region? What are we likely to see in Yemen, in Saudi Arabia, in Pakistan?
Sure. Well, each of those three countries has a tremendous cause for concern for us. I mean, Yemen has a large al-Qaeda presence, so destabilization there is a massive threat to U.S. interest. Saudi Arabia has crucial oil reserves, so if anything happens there, we're in a world of hurt. And, of course, Pakistan has nuclear weapons. And so each of those countries is very, very important to U.S. interest in the long term. And while I think we should all be happy for the individual level of Egyptians, the reality is that at a regional level, at a strategic level, U.S. interests are really very much in disarray right now.
What can we do? I mean, obviously the politicians are going to argue, and those who don't like President Obama are going to, criticize his behavior in response to all of this. But the reality seems to be we, the United States, were powerless to stop this. I mean, I guess we could have come out more strongly on Mubarak's side, but could we have stopped this, Mike?
I don't think we could have necessarily stopped this, but I do think, and this was the hardest thing as an intelligence officer, is to step out of the box of our own paradigms and the kinds of things that we look at the world as through our own eyes. And what we have to do is learn how to look at it through the world's eyes. You see right now that Twitter, when people are calling this the Twitter or Facebook revolution, well, we know from Al-Qaeda and from Muslim Brotherhood themselves, from others, that young, radical Muslim group is very effective on the internet. And so we have to figure out how to get ahead of this through intelligence and through better collaboration with partners, and understanding really that the silent moral majority in the Middle East tends to be silent. They're not as active out there in the social media websites, whereas the people that are able to create and stir up the passions of the people are actually very attuned to that. We've certainly seen that with Al-Qaeda, and I think we're seeing that with the Muslim Brotherhood spread throughout the entire region.
I mentioned some of these in introducing you. You were the Director of Strategy for the White House Homeland Security Council, an Intel Officer for the Office of Secretary of Defense, a Senior Analyst for the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs. Your resume is long and impressive, Mike, and I want to ask you the same question I've asked a couple of our other guests today. As you watch the joy on the streets of Cairo, do you feel joy? What do you feel?
Personally, I feel fear, and that's because the reality is, like I said, I'm happy at an individual level, but I look at what's the stability of the region. That's really where U.S. interests. We talk a lot about Israel, but frankly, Al-Qaeda came here on 9/11, and I think that we're seeing a lot more spread of that instability throughout a region that we know has a lot of dangerous implications for us. I think you start looking at weapons of mass destruction, you start looking at instability in places like Yemen, you start looking at the financial wealth, and naturally you're going to see repression in the other regimes throughout the Middle East as a result of what's happened in Egypt. So while we're happy for the Egyptians, at a personal level I'm concerned for the individuals in these other countries, as well as concerned about the stability of some allies that frankly we rely on to keep the situation from getting even worse.
Yeah, Dan Gillerman used the same term. Great concern was his reaction. Even though one feels joy for those who were watching on screen left, there is concern for the United States of America and for Israel at this hour. Mike, thank you so much. Mike Barrett, everyone. We appreciate your expertise.
Thank you.